Back in 2006, it was announced that Peter Jackson's next big movie project would be an adaptation of the Temeraire novels by Naomi Novik. The first three were released that year in quick succession, and I was immediately interested in checking them out because he did such a great job with Lord of the Rings. The premise is that it's an alternate history of the Napoleonic Wars with dragons. In addition to having the reds on the ground and the blues in the sea, you'd have the greens in the air. England had the best dragons in the world, but France outnumbered them 2-1, which made the conflict a lot more intriguing. There are 9 books in the series. She released them all over the course of about 10 years. Like I said, those first 3 came out all at once, and then there were a couple that had gaps near the end as she put a lot more into the books to get the details all down. This is a well-loved series and did get awards when it was coming out. It's been about 8 years since the last one was released, and since you guys liked my big Aragon recap video, I thought that I would cover all 9 of these books here in quick succession to give you an overview of the series. So, there will be a spoiler warning on this. However, I will avoid spoiling absolutely everything, and when we get to the end, I'm going to be intentionally vague on some things so that when you do decide to go through this yourself, there will still be plenty of things that you can experience for the first time. So, without further ado, let's go. Book 1, His Majesty's Dragon. This first book in the series is a quintessential training camp novel. In fact, this is the book where I decided to coin that term for anything that involves the main character and the reader both being treated to an explanation of the world, usually in some kind of school or camp setting. The main character is Captain Will Lawrence. The year is 1804. He's a British naval officer. He's fighting against Napoleon. I read an interview once with Naomi Novik where she said that she based Will Lawrence off of Russell Crowe's performance in Master and Commander. And even as she's describing him in those first chapters, just the way that he looks, you can get that picture of him. So imagine him and you'll have a pretty good idea of this character and how he starts. The book opens up with Lawrence's ship overtaking a French vessel that has a dragon egg in the cargo hold. The egg hatches, and the dragon immediately imprints on Lawrence, meaning that his career in the Navy is over. Because English dragons are scarce, and the French outnumber them so much, so once you're imprinted, you are drafted no matter who you are. This is a big deal for an English officer, and it changes the plans that he had made for his life. So Lawrence names the dragon Temeraire. This is a French word that means reckless or fearless. There's a similar word in Spanish, temerario, which really is more to the reckless side of things, but it's got a nuanced definition that can mean bold as well. I thought it was ironic that both the French and the British in real life had ships of this name in that language. In this world, dragons are born with the ability to speak. They can hear and learn through the shell of their egg before they hatch. So Will Lawrence was caught kind of by surprise by this, that the dragon was born already speaking English. I remember being kind of surprised by the same thing when I read it, but that's just, authors can do whatever they want with the world that they're setting, and this was a neat little trick. They do lack the natural self-determination that mankind enjoys. They kind of naturally have an inclination, at least the domesticated ones do, to picking a handler and being subservient to him. But this will change over the course of the series, which spans about 10 years in world. So Lawrence and Temeraire report to a training camp in Scotland where he meets other captains and their dragons. They're all of different breeds. Some dragons will only imprint on female handlers, so again, the English desperation for aviators wins out over societal gender norms, and the Aerial Corps is the only sex-integrated branch of the military. While in training, Lawrence makes friends and enemies with other characters, and he even uncovers a French spy in the camp who was sent to steal Temeraire. Lawrence learns that Temeraire was on a French ship because he was a gift from the Chinese. This doesn't come up in this book, but it's relevant. He's a rare breed of dragon that is only fit for emperors, and since China's emperor already had one, they sent the egg to Napoleon. Now he's a military dragon for the English. This is going to cause problems that reverberate throughout the entire series. The story concludes with Napoleon attempting a bold invasion at Dover, using dragons to haul transport vessels full of troops. But during the battle, Temeraire instinctively uses a special attack of his breed that he didn't know that he had. So you got some dragons that can breathe fire, others that can spit acid or poison. Most of them, they're just dragons. But Temeraire has the power to draw in huge amounts of air and to release it all at once in a divine wind, is what it's called. This super weapon allows the British to repel the French and win the day. And thus ends Book 1. Book 2 is called Throne of Jade. Check out these covers here. The first 4 will have a similar style. We'll get into the others in a minute. There are obvious political ramifications for having a Chinese imperial dragon doing military work among the English when he's supposed to be a French companion. At least this is all a very big deal as far as the Chinese are concerned. But they have not yet allied with Napoleon or Britain. They've kind of sat the war out. Now that there's a concern that they might join Napoleon just out of spite for not having their dragon, Lawrence and Temeraire are sent to China to do whatever they can on a diplomatic mission to smooth things over. They sail on a huge transport ship with a bunch of other dragons, since going overland would make them vulnerable to Napoleon's ground forces across Europe. The sea voyage is long, and they encounter various difficulties over the next year. There's one nocturnal dragon, a breed called a fleur-de-lis, which attacks the ship in the night. There's also a sea serpent that attacks the ship. That was a cool little piece of in-world fauna culture, and they'll pop up in another book. And then Lawrence also has a growing contention with the ship's captain named Riley, who is pro-slavery, while Lawrence is an abolitionist. Historically, England settled their issues with slavery well in advance of the United States and through legal means without a civil war because, sissies, who doesn't fight this stuff out? Come on now. Anyway, when they finally arrive in China, they learn that the diplomatic landscape is even more complex than they thought, since Temeraire was a twin. He was sent to Napoleon so that he wouldn't cause a succession crisis by imprinting on the wrong heir to the Chinese throne. The Chinese don't actually care about Napoleon, they care about their own internal stability. Still, there are certain parties in China's court who want their dragon back, and they attempt to assassinate Lawrence in order to make Temeraire choose a new master. But Lawrence, because he's the protagonist, survives the attempts, and during one intense conflict, the man leading the attempt dies, resolving an internal political problem in China. The emperor then adopts Lawrence through a legal mechanism, kind of like getting an honorary PhD, but it resolves any customs issues with Temeraire having a non-royal human companion. Technically, Lawrence is in the imperial family now. As for Temeraire, his main takeaway from the experience is that dragons in China enjoy better rights than in England, and he wants to change that. This is going to plant a seed that will develop over the course of the books as Lawrence and Temeraire are very fond of each other, and in his innocence, Temeraire begins to kind of question why British customs exist in a certain way, why dragons, even though they're intelligent and sentient, why they're also subservient when there are other cultures that do it differently, and they will develop their philosophies on this thing over time. Book 3, this is my favorite probably in the entire series. It's called Black Powder War. On their way back to England, Lawrence and Temeraire, along with the other dragons in their group, have to stop off in the Ottoman Empire to pick up 3 dragon eggs that England has purchased from the Sultan. They'll be guided by Thar K, a mixed-race man whose parents were from England and Nepal. He's a good character. He'll pop in and out for the rest of the series. Just very likable, like a tough, rugged survivor-type guy, and he can just kind of pop in anywhere around the world and adapt to any situation really well. Cool guy. When Lawrence arrives in Istanbul, the Sultan has changed his mind about the eggs because he just tied up his empire with Napoleon. It turns out that one of the casualties in China was a prince named Yongxing, and his dragon, Lien, who now has no master, she went off in search of a new royal master who could help her get revenge on Lawrence and Temeraire. She picked Napoleon, the guy that Temeraire was supposed to end up with in the beginning, and now she's advising him on courses of action that will help him and hurt Lawrence. This is not an insubstantial thing. So after being stonewalled and lied to in Istanbul, Lawrence gets tired of waiting on a resolution. England has paid for the eggs, so he takes what's rightfully theirs, effectively stealing them from the hatchery. They're attacked, but they escape, heading west and stopping along the way in Prussia. Again, they're bogged down by local politics and the goings-on of the war with Napoleon. Prussia has allied against Napoleon, and the British promised them support, but it never arrived. Blah, blah, blah. It's complicated. Lawrence and Temeraire join up under Prussian command, but their tactics are outdated, the Prussians' tactics, and Napoleon beats them, and he takes several of their dragons hostage as a result. This is where I want to specify something that's different here from other dragon series that I've read. So the dragons in this book, they're measured by like tonnage and length and stuff, but you really got to think of them as being the size of naval vessels, to the point where they even have their own crews. They've got cargo nets that rig up underneath. They have tents along the back and stuff. You wear a harness, and you're rigged along different lines along the dragon when they're aloft. But this isn't like an Aragon style thing where we just put a saddle and there's one rider and the dragon can carry one rider. These things are freaking huge. They are ships in the sky. And the aerial combat tactics reflect that. It's really cool to see not just how she came up with this, but how she writes it. And she writes it kind of in the parlance of the day as well. There's a very 19th century feel to the prose that she uses. It works. It turns out that once again, the Chinese dragon Lian is involved in Prussia. She's teaching Napoleon new tactics and providing him with critical intelligence. Lawrence and his allies retreat to northern Poland, which is besieged by Napoleon, and they're only able to escape when Tharke arrives with a command of feral dragons, something very cool that we're introduced to in this novel. There's not just like British dragon this and French dragon that. There are also just feral dragons, and Tharke is able to speak their language. They have their own language, and using the help of the ferals, they're able to evacuate the city, and Lawrence can finally return with Temeraire to England. This takes us into book 4, called Empire of Ivory. Lawrence learns the devastating reason why England never sent dragons to its allies in Prussia. It turns out there is a dragon plague going around, and it's killing them off at an alarming rate. It doesn't appear to have hit the French yet, but its mortality rate is horrifying. Unless they can find a cure, England will lose its entire air force in a matter of years. So once Lawrence and Temeraire see the symptoms of this plague, they realize that Temeraire briefly had that same sickness while on the transport ship to China in Book 2. They thought it was just a cold, and he was treated with a rare and pungent mushroom from Africa. If they can find more of it, they can cure the plague. So Lawrence and company head down to the Dark Continent to find this miracle cure. While they're there, they see how Africans interact with dragons and how their tribal relations play out. It takes a lot of trial and error as the aviators look for other ways to treat the plague symptoms for their dragons. To their chagrin, all of the other dragons have fallen ill except Temeraire, who's now immune because he already had the sickness. When they stumble upon a huge cave full of the rare species of mushroom, I believe this is down in Cape Town, South Africa. Some of these names of places change and stuff because Naomi Novik knows the history of it, but she's got to build one that's consistent with the alternate history that she's doing here. So sometimes these places are named different, but I'm pretty sure this was all set in South Africa. They're ambushed by the local tribe of Tswana, who are aggressive and hostile toward the British over the slave trade. Like many exchanges in this series, the goings-on between African tribes and the British military will be of greater entertainment to the reader with a knowledge of actual history. So be sure to take some time and find good articles on like various slave revolts and African uprisings in the early 1800s, because she ties that all really well into this new continuity that she's building here. But to keep things short, the dragons escape with several mushroom samples that they found so that they can take the cure back to England, and then later they rescue their crew from the Tswana. When Lawrence returns to England, he finds out that the Admiralty has allowed an infected French dragon to return to France because they want to spread the plague and kill off the French Air Force. Lawrence is appalled by this. He's developing his own philosophy of dragon rights and independence, so alongside Temeraire, he steals some of the mushrooms and takes those directly to Napoleon for them to cultivate. Napoleon offers Lawrence the chance to defect because he's like, hey, if you go back, they're going to execute you. And Lawrence is like, yeah, I know that, but I'm a man of honor. I'm British through and through, but I don't believe in dirty fighting, and I don't believe in genocide. And what the Admiralty tried to do here by sending you this sick dragon, that was both. So Napoleon has his own honor. He doesn't capture Lawrence or imprison him or anything. He lets him go. And he allows Lawrence to return to England, and Lawrence knows that he will most likely be executed for treason. Heck of an ending to that fourth book. Book 5, we come to Victory of Eagles. That's what this is called here. They changed the cover art style. They don't just have like a circular image in the middle with a dragon wrapped around it. They did this other style. Wasn't a fan of it. I just like the consistency. Anyway, Lawrence is stripped of all rank and status because of what he just did in the last book. Now he's basically like an unranked ship hand on a ship called the Goliath. And Temeraire is stuck in a breeding ground with other dragons who have lost their handlers or who have been captured from enemy fleets. As long as Temeraire behaves, Lawrence won't be executed. But then Napoleon crosses the channel to invade, and Lawrence's ship is sunk. Temeraire thinks that Lawrence is dead, so he rallies the dragons in the camp, and they form their own regiment to start proactively attacking the French. The government finds Lawrence among the survivors of the ship, and they send him to bring Temeraire back under control because we just can't have renegade dragons doing their own thing without being bossed around by the British, right? There's a huge battle that once again contrasts with actual historical military movements of the Napoleonic Wars, and it has resisted my attempts to summarize it here, so I'll just say basically the English take a bad loss and the French advance into England in this story. I'm not an expert on the Napoleonic Wars, but I don't think Napoleon ever actually landed in England, but it'd be pretty intense and dramatic if he did, so she wrote that into the story. During this conflict, one of Lawrence's friends, Captain Granby, is captured by the French. He's got a dragon who was one of the eggs that they took from Istanbul. She hatched. Her name is Iskierka, and she's a fire breather with a rash personality. Lawrence and Temeraire set off to rescue Granby and Iskierka. He then joins with General Wellesley, who's the future Duke of Wellington, to coordinate efforts around England and encircle the French. The military have retaken control of the English Channel, so Napoleon won't get reinforcements. Whatever he's got on the island is all he's got. The dragons do get more of a say in how to carry out operations. They're starting to assert that independence. And in helping the residents of the English countryside, they garner favor for their independence movement. People will say, hey, these dragons helped us. They did it on their own. Maybe they're not so bad. Maybe they're more like us than we thought. Finally, the English confront Napoleon and his forces head on at the coast. Lord Nelson arrives with a fleet of ships from Copenhagen to help. The artillery is able to pound Napoleon's forces and kill most of them, while Napoleon's dragon Liane uses her own divine wind attack, she's the same breed as Temeraire, to sink Nelson's fleet. Napoleon and Liane then escape back to France. For his service, Lawrence's sentence is changed from treason and imprisonment to just transportation, which means you're put on a boat and sent off to Australia. But they send him there with specific orders to go help fortify the continent down under and also set up an air corps on that continent. This takes us into Book 6, Tongues of Serpents. They're back to kind of the old cover style. I believe those dragons are Temeraire and Iskierka. I'm going to be brutally honest. This is probably the most boring book in the series. There are big and cool things that develop in it, but as I've often said, I believe I counted the pages once, and it's about 300 pages long, and it feels like 150 to 200 pages of it is just Lawrence and his friends walking around in the outback and getting lost. That's not an exaggeration. It just feels like a slog through big parts of it. The governorship of New South Wales is currently in question, as a rebellion has just happened, and now they're waiting on word from London to see what to do going forward. Lawrence and co. brought 3 eggs with them. They were supposed to establish an aerial corps in Australia, but it's going poorly. The first egg hatched for a bad handler who abused his previous mount. We saw him in Book 1. The second egg was stolen by the Aborigines. This prompts a hunt across the outback because if you're trying to conquer a continent, you don't need the people fighting you to have a dragon on their side. This disadvantages Lawrence and his men because they don't know the terrain, while the Aborigines are familiar with the monsters there. Apparently, in the real world, there's something like there's a mythological creature in Australia called a bunyip, and Novick wrote a version of it into the story and treated it as like, oh yeah, this is the monster they have down in Australia. They're like these subterranean sand creatures that can pop up and eat you. When they do finally track down the Aborigines, the egg has already hatched, and the dragon has chosen a captain from the Larukia people. I think that's the name of an Aborigine group down there. They also discover a Chinese smuggling ring. The Chinese have managed to train sea serpents to ship cargo down to Australia, despite British efforts to assert dominance on the continent. Since Temeraire is Chinese, he's able to offer a diplomatic solution to the budding problem, but he's unable to persuade the dragon, the one that bonded with the Larukia, to come back to New South Wales with them. So the Chinese retain control of the waters, and the English just lost an egg. So Lawrence and co., they return to New South Wales. Another man has been appointed governor, and he wants to attack the smuggling operation on the other coast, which leads to another rebellion, because apparently the only people that like to fight more than Americans are Australians. The question of governorship is eventually settled with a sane dude being left in charge. Captain Granby and Iskierka, the fire breather, are sent to South America to solve a new problem there, while Lawrence decides to retire in Australia with Temeraire. We are 2/3 of the way to the end of the series now. Book 7 is called Crucible of Gold, and this is where things get interesting. The Napoleonic Wars spread to the Americas here. They changed back to the same cover style as Book 5, though. I don't know what's going on. So there's a lot of political stuff going on in this book. Here's the skinny. The Tswana tribe from Africa, back in the 4th book, they are now at the height of their power, and they are trying to reverse the slave trade, the transatlantic trade. They are focusing on Brazil, because that's apparently where a bunch of those Africans were sent. The Lundis and others had trafficked a bunch of the Tswana to this South American continent. They're demanding that all the Africans there, both human and dragon, get sent back to Africa, and they have allied with Napoleon to make it happen. That's significant here. This is a problem because Prince João, I think it's the Portuguese version of Juan, Prince João of Portugal is hiding out in Brazil, and if Napoleon's allies capture him, Portugal will break its alliance with England. England is using Portugal to prepare a land invasion across Spain and over the Pyrenees into southern France. So, because of all of this, England needs dragons in Brazil to protect the Portuguese prince. This is going to get tricky. So Iskierka and Granby are already on their way. When news reaches Lawrence in Australia, he's given a pardon. He's made a captain again. And he and a bunch of the others that are there, he's got a team of other captains and dragons and their crews all the time. Like they're hanging out with him, even though like they're not in trouble. They stay with him. They head off on the dragon transport with Captain Riley, but the crew is undisciplined. They get drunk. Like the ship burns down, and the only people who survive fly off on the dragons. And they're out over open ocean. There's no land in sight. And finally, like they're forced to land on the first thing that they see. They find a ship, but it's a French ship, and the French take them to an island that again is too far from the mainland. Leave them stranded there, leave them marooned there. But I thought it was really cool that they found a pirate ship, so they do a little bit of Jack Sparrow stuff, and they use that to sail the rest of the way to Brazil. And so we get a cool look at this alternate version of Brazil, where the Incas are still a powerful force to be reckoned with. They survived smallpox and European depredations. They don't have any particular love or trust for the Europeans because of Francisco Pizarro. They aren't the only power on the continent. The Tswana are there. Like I said, they want their people back. Napoleon wants the Tswana and the Inca on his side, and the British want to fight Napoleon. So we get more involved political complications combined with some exciting escapes and maneuvers. Those result in Lawrence convincing Prince João to agree to terms with the Tswana and send all the slaves back to Africa. That's something that the Portuguese haven't wanted to do, but now they're facing a military threat, and the alternative is worse. So Napoleon himself then shows up in Brazil to offer the Incan empress an alliance by marriage after divorcing his wife in France. And she's like, well, yeah, I think I'll marry this guy so that I can have his power on my side, and we'll get the British out of here. But through diplomacy and military cunning, Lawrence and the British are able to secure the alliance and the manumission of the Tswana. So they're able to get the Portuguese and the Tswana to make peace, and they'll agree to send those slaves back to Africa. The story ends with Lawrence receiving word that he has to go back to China and secure an alliance with them and Britain. So this is getting bogged down a little bit, but it's a worldwide affair, and it's handled very well. Book 8 is called Blood of Tyrants. Now we have a completely different cover style. They're just all over the place. I think this one's fine, though. This starts out with one of the things that I hate most in fiction, and that's where you get several books into an established series, and then you give your main character amnesia. I hate that more than I hate multiverse writing. I just hate it. It sucks. So we start with Lawrence. He is in Japan, and he speaks Chinese. He has no recollection of how he learned Chinese, and he has amnesia. He was shipwrecked. He's on the shore. He gets arrested for being white outside of Nagasaki. It's the only place where that sort of thing is allowed. It's kind of rough when you consider that in about 135 years they won't want white guys anywhere near Nagasaki, especially not in anything that flies. But I digress. Elsewhere, Temeraire and a British diplomat called Hammond are looking for Lawrence. So it's that kind of story where we start in the middle of things and work backward to find out what happened. Temeraire is nervous for Lawrence and also nervous for his own egg, which needs attention. Oh yeah, Temeraire hooked up with Iskierka, so they're going to have a fire-breathing divine wind dragon baby. That'll be pretty potent. That won't be Temeraire's only bit of girlfriend action, though, because once they get into China, he has to mate with another dragon of his kind because there is a challenge to the throne again, and there is a shortage of celestial dragons like himself. That's the breed that only royalty can have. The emperor has to have one, so Temeraire does what he can to breed another one, and then he meets up with Lawrence, who he finds out his memory loss goes back 8 years. He's upset that he's no longer in the Navy, so we get a rehash of that particular storyline from the first book, which is, again, like you're treading the same ground with no real tangible merit. It's why I hate amnesia stories. He also, like, once his friends realize that he's upset about that, they try not to bring up other things that would upset him, like certain old friends that have died, the fact that he's got a beef with his father, and the fact that he was also guilty of treason for a while. One thing that's going to upset him later in the book is he'll get word that his father died and he was never able to patch things over, and so it's one of the many things that that causes some emotional turmoil for Lawrence over the course of this series. Anyway, kind of like the last time they were there, Lawrence and Temeraire discover a political plot to steal the throne, and they also run into their old friend Tharkay. But the familiarity of all this, the fact that they're basically rehashing Book 2 and Book 8, it helps Lawrence's memories to come back at the very least. This stresses him out because once he's got a grip on all that, he realizes that they've lost a bunch of time, and Napoleon is going to invade Russia in like a couple of weeks. They are able to get a huge force of Chinese dragons together, but when they show up in Russia, they are again outmatched by Napoleon and his cadre of allies. So we're in Russia instead of Prussia, and we're gonna go through actual historical battles, but they're told through a different lens, the way that Naomi Novik has done through other books in this series. So there were cool things in this. There were good emotional beats, but as I've said, this is just why I don't like amnesia stories. Anyway, the battle is complex and complicated, and on top of all that, winter is coming. If you ever look at, I believe it was the winter of 1812, that was the year that they call like the year without a summer. That was an historically bad winter. And it was probably not made any better by the fact that they were in Russia, and they're low on food and materials and stuff, and they got to hunker down. It's rough. It's rough. But we finally get to book 9, called League of Dragons, with yet another cover style. I don't hate it. It's fine. I wish that they would have all been in the style of the first 3, but whatever. So Napoleon, he got beat in Russia, but he is regrouping and he has a new trick up his sleeve. While Lawrence and Temeraire have been going around the world and talking about dragon rights and independence over the course of the series, Napoleon decides to pull an Abraham Lincoln, and he promises freedom for all dragons if they help him win. So word spreads around the world, and there are dragons in different countries that are living in really bad conditions. They see some of this in Russia. This causes a lot of problems for the British. Things get even more complicated when Russian resentment of dragons, like a Russian guy who hates dragons, he starts piping off about how he wishes the plague had killed them, and he says this like within earshot of Lawrence, and Lawrence gets super pissed off, and he demands satisfaction, and they end up dueling, and the guy shoots him, and now Lawrence needs time to heal, and unfortunately for him, Temeraire finds out that Napoleon's dragon Liane wants to kill Temeraire's egg, so he has a moment of paternal panic. He leaves to protect his child before Lawrence is all better. Some hijinks ensue. They cross paths with other characters, and then finally, everybody is brought together in the Alps, where they are captured by the French. So we've got Lawrence and his dragon Temeraire, Granby and his dragon Iskierka, and Tharkea is there. And they discover that the French are preparing a huge army of dragon eggs up there to hatch all at once, giving them an unbeatable numerical advantage. You figure they wouldn't all need handlers if they're being coached. It's like, hey, you'll have freedom. You won't have to answer to like a person telling you to do everything if you just integrate into our army. So the dragon plague from book 4 is still going on. It's not really like felt immediately in wherever they are in the book, but it's acknowledged that it's happening in the world. And since Napoleon has the medicine to cure it, thanks to Lawrence, all the way back in book 4, that gives him another inroad with the dragons. Plus, he's taking Lawrence's ideas for dragon rights to win the sentient creatures over to his side. So it's all an extra little dagger twist for our heroes because their good ideas are being used against them. But Lawrence is the protagonist, so he's able to escape with his friends and they get back to England. He's promoted to an admiral due to his main character energy, and he trains a new aviator corps to go to war on the continent. So we get some more signature battles. Some of them are crafted from whole cloth. There are tweaked historical details. It's all done in accordance with the continuity that Novick has set up here. The dragons form their own political coalitions, and the Tiswana, they're fighting against Napoleon due to their distrust of European powers, and then that Incan empress that married Napoleon ends up betraying him, kind of for the same reason. She wants that Incan autonomy. All in all, I'll just summarize it here by saying that the good guys win. I'm not going to spoil the details as to how, because even though I've given you this overview of the series, like I said, it is my hope that that you'll go through and actually read it. There are weddings and victory celebrations and generally good times for people who have had a hard go of it throughout this series. I really hope you'll give it a shot. There's still some part of me that hopes that in the current landscape we can get these movies, get the books as movies. I'd love to see the original premise of Peter Jackson at the helm. He's definitely the right guy to handle a concept like this. Unfortunately, he's tied up with derivative Lord of the Rings tie-ins that I don't have high hopes for. While this highly original property is still waiting in the wings, pun intended, maybe if it gets another surge in interest, we can make something happen. But even if we don't, like Naomi Novik has put together something unique and special here. I think you guys should check it out. The only content warning I would issue is like there's the occasional F-bomb here and there. Like the books usually have 1, maybe 2 in them. Other than that, it's all period accurate stuff with some battlefield brutality. And it's all wrapped up in really wonderful prose and some inventive takes on what history would look like in a world like this. So check out the Temeraire series. I really think you guys are going to like it. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you're interested in alternate history, there's a series that I wrote called Engines of Liberty, where the British won the American Revolution using magic, and 200 years later, those uppity Yankee rebels want a rematch. I think you'll really like it. You can find the link in the description below. Thanks for watching. Drive safe. See you out there.